So we're going to zoom into San Juan Island. So this is located in San Juan County, and we lost my large scale slide, which will probably pop up later. And so this is in False Bay Creek Watershed, which is about a third of San Juan Island, the southern third. And this is in the ag, as you can see, is in the agricultural part of this watershed. The two green lakes there up the upper left are upper and lower Lake Zylstra reservoirs built in the 60s. And then you can pretty much see a lot of the channel downstream of that. This channel here is False Bay Creek. And then the channel that's coming down from the right. So flow is from top to bottom. And then the side is the black circle there. And that's what we're going to talk about. False Bay Creek is listed under 303D list for temperature and bacteria. So one of the advantages of working in this lower False Bay watershed is that there's a lot of conservation ownership. Besides having the land bank, which are lands in kind of the rose colored, we also have the Salmon Preservation Trust, which is really a very functional land trust, private land trust, owns a lot of land in the San Juan Islands. And yeah, so between the two organizations, there's quite a bit of property to work on, and we are starting to work in there. This was really my first foray into the lower watershed, and we're starting to expand that. We're working. We've got a ecology grant to work up here on what's called Red Mill Farm. And then down at the bottom here is False Bay, UW, University of Washington, False Bay Biological Preserve, and that's a bit of their property as well. This is the missing slide. So San Juan Islands are really, so we're kind of a pipsqueak. We were just talking about Skagit watershed for the last couple of presentations. We're, just a blip on that landscape, but we're all, we all have some larger forcing mechanisms that we're dealing with. For the San Juan Islands, at least the marine waters, it's the outflow of the Fraser. This was during the the Pineapple Expresses we had in mid-November. But we all have forcing mechanisms that are driving stuff that we're experiencing. So one of the things that for me is really important, especially in this ag land that's been farmed for so long, is understanding the site history. This particular property that we're working on is a naturally wind-deposited depression wetland, which was identified in the General Land Office back in 1874. There was about a 35-year period when the property was ditched, and actually most of the lower watershed was ditched. San Juan Islands back in the 20s had over 500 farms, which is kind of amazing to consider, considering the land area we have. And quite a bit of ag going on here. This is really predates Eastern Washington farming. In the 1980s, duck hunters purchased property and they encouraged winter flooding. So in 22 to 56, there was really an effort to dry out the property, to ignore the fact that it was a depressional wetland. The wetlands reinvigorated in the 80s. That continued through 98. There was a new owner, conservation owner, who allowed hunting to continue, and then also grazing. That grazing land manager in 2004 wanted to reactivate the ditching district of the past, and so they went out there without permits and they got busted by DFW and the Corps. That led to an enforcement action and a really rather poor designed mitigation. In 2006, False Bay Creek corridor was fenced. In 2008, the San Juan County Land Bank purchased, and that's what we got. So this is a site. This is from February 1st to 2020. So you can see this obviously a depressional wetland. But there's this is really flat area as ag fields like this are, and but this is a particularly wet part of the ag, kind of this Falls Bay Creek corridor, and that really kind of determines what you're going to do here and what's possible. As a note, it actually makes it really hard to do riparian planting. Especially bare roots. This site was flooded again in February in 2021. I had to burn up WACD's plants because bare root plants I was going to put in the ground. Actually, that was in 2020. In 2021, we did get them in the ground. But and then it's been flooded from mid-November through now again. So this is an 04 aerial photo. The site we're looking at is this square right here. This is a project area, 40 acres. So as you can see, there's a lot of wetland. So this is Falls Bay Creek coming down here. This is San Juan Valley Creek coming down here. So you can see mostly west of Falls Bay Creek is wetland, very clearly a wetland. This is right before the creek was ditched. And which led to the enforcement actions. So planting remediation, this was done by either the contract crews for the mitigation or by San Juan County Land Bank. There was a few clumps of willows that somebody had planted before 2004 that weren't that old, but maybe the conservation landowner had them put in. For the mitigation, they put in just over 1,000 Sitka and Pacific willows. And this is just on the east side of Falls Bay Creek. FBC, by the way, is Falls Bay Creek. SJVC is San Juan Valley Creek. So they were just looking at replanting where the ditch had occurred, which was on the east side of Falls Bay Creek. And that actually, the understanding that is really important to understanding why these plants survived is because they were basically planted in a very disturbed site. Because what they did was they filled in the old ditch and then they planted that with these willows. It's a very important piece of information. The Falls Land Bank came in 2009 to 10 and replaced about a third of the willows that had died and added 100 dogwood. Land Bank really didn't do any site prep. About one time a year, and this has continued on through 2015, they would come in and they would use hand grass size to site around the willows about once a year, maybe a couple feet radius, and that was it. It was very low maintenance. So San Juan Valley Creek, so Falls Bay Creek was fenced in 2006. San Juan Valley Creek was fenced in 2015. And they used a strategy of wrapping the willows in burlap, just little burlap strips, and then they used plastic 4-foot tubes for the bare root plants, trees and shrubs. So this is a drawing for the mitigation. Pet peeve here. We're all a lot of us are stream people. I come from a stream restoration background. People see a ditch in a wetland and they immediately think we've got to remeander this ditch into a stream. I would say, especially since this is depressional wetland, this is a depositional site. We don't need to force a meandered creek, which is really a meandered ditch, into a straightened ditch. We need to do wetland restoration here. And it's been a really tough concept to gain a foothold locally. And it's not just local folks, it's folks that come in from the outside have the same sort of bias. So in this drawing, these here are log jams, which I think have some utility. over the short term and long term. They did put gravel spawning pads in here and here, which in a depositional environment are virtually useless, and are buried somewhere under the muck now. And really what we want to do is we want the site to become more of a wetland, become what it was historically, and the channel will find its route through the forcing mechanisms of the vegetation and whatever trees and wood that are there. But it's but we want certainty, and that's not the way to get certainty. Anyway, I'm happy to talk more about that afterwards. So Sidemap, 2009. So this is when False Bay Creek was fenced. You can see the fence line here. San Juan Valley Creek is still open to cattle grazing. This site had 2 pastures then, the west side and the east side. Now it has 3 because San Juan Valley Creek's been fenced in 2015. But definitely an ag focus. We have about 8 acres total with both creeks fenced now in riparian corridor. So this is 2 different kind of examples. 2008, and actually, so this shows the site in 2008. It actually was planted in 2006 and 7. So this is a couple years of reed canary grass growth, and still it's looking pretty. Reed canary grass is not all that, not all that thick compared to 2019, where you have about 13 years of reed canary grass growth, and you can see the orange helmets of the WCC crew kind of buried in that. So I started this, I threw the WCC crew out there and said good luck, and quickly realized that it was a futile operation and I had to change my strategy quickly. And so they went out there and they did the best they could in really tough circumstances. And then we shifted to more mechanical means of site prep after that. But this is False Bay Creek, the east side of False Bay Creek. So this is actually the creek here. So that's why they were planting the east side, because that was all disturbed through the ditching. But really, there is very modest competition by grasses or by any kind of grasses or rushes in this. It's really a good site for willow growth, and you can see why they're fairly successful. By 2020, this willow right here was one of these was planted. There was a nice little corridor that's come up from that effort. So they really were able to take advantage of the site conditions in order to minimally do site prep, do virtually no site prep, and virtually no site maintenance. They were successful with that at that time. So this is False Bay Creek in 2013. So it's still, San Juan Valley Creek is still open, and False Bay Creek is still fenced. There's some willow along False Bay Creek, and a little bit on San Juan Valley Creek, but that's very minimal stuff. You can't really see the stems that the land bank is planted, which are a lot of them are on San Juan Valley Creek on the east side of False Bay Creek. They're just too small. They've taken a lot of time to get established, so they're just not noticeable in this photo. So this is San Juan Valley Creek, and so we're looking downstream in this photo, down south. And so in the top photo, 2015. So when you see in an ag field a lot of juncus, rush, which cattle do not like to graze, and it basically looks like a lawn. This is a well-prepared site for planting. This is a heavily grazed site. Now, normally in November, the grasses die back a bit, but still, if they would have been as thick as they are in June 2020, you would still see the matting, which you don't see. And I forgot to mention, in the earlier photo I showed of the site with the orange helmets, they were standing on a foot of thatch. In some cases, it was so thick, it was like standing on bales of hay. So we were So really, site prep is critical for, I think, for survival. And what happened, so this is June 2020 down the bottom photo. And we really pretty much lost the site. We planted in November 2019, COVID hit, and I lost my work crews. WCC was not able to come out the islands until August of 2020. So I was using volunteers. We were doing the best we can. I was out here every Friday, all summer long, mostly by myself, mowing and weed whacking, sometimes with one or two volunteers. I wore the volunteers out very quickly. Yeah, it was kind of a tough go. And I'll talk about that in a sec. So this is right after San Juan Valley Creek was fenced in the top photo. And they planted some willows along the creek, had pretty good success. Even with trees the size you see down at the bottom, voles started to nibble on those trees. And so it's even, 4 years later, they still needed some weed whacking because voles were starting to work on them. In a lot of sites, voles will also chew on root networks, but this site is so wet that they're all above ground. And so our strategy really is to keep the area open so that raptors and owls and whatever can, and there's a fox that's local here, can have at it, can hunt them. So False Bay Preserve in 2016. So this, as you can see, the fencing that we just saw is up. So both creeks are fully fenced. You can see the willows are starting to come on, the ones that were planted in 2006, 7, 2009, 10 on the east side of False Bay Creek are starting to come on and be observable. The whole thing's starting to expand. It's really looking good. A lot of bare spots still. And really, this was kind of the end of the land banks work. They just got overwhelmed with this site. They lost control of the site, and they kind of just it was too much for them to handle. And then I came on board in 2019, and so really had a site that was fully occupied by canary grass, dense. So really, the first step, as I kind of indicated, was site prep. We started with weed whacking. That was futile on this site. And in the summer, I rented a brush mower that was attached to an excavator. I had one of the road crew come out with the county excavator and just brush mow the entire site. If in hindsight, if I'd have known about flail mowers at that point, I would have rented a flail mower. But I didn't know about flail mowers. Actually, the brush mower got bogged down on an excavator. The canary grass was so thick that you could hear it just almost come to a standstill if it tried to do too much, which is pretty amazing. In October, I wasn't really happy with the brush mowing preparation site prep, so I went out. I rented a flail mower that's on front of a bobcat, tracked bobcat, and went out and ran it around myself. Got in trouble for that with the union, and got it stuck, and I had to have the road crew come out and bail me out. And we also sprayed glyphosate with the WCC crew on a small portion of the site, and then we got weathered out on that. So we'll be able to talk about that. So November 19, WCC crew came in and planted about 9,000 willow stakes, Sitka Pacific and Hooker, really tight spacing, 4x4 spacing. And the idea here is to shade out the canary grass as soon as possible. And what I've noticed is that voles do not like full canopy closure. They, for whatever reason, they like to run around grass, and so there's very little grass in there, so they're not found under there. And so, this was both vole control and canary control. Summer weed whacking, just trying to get back control of the site. We finally got control of it towards the end of 2020. Lost a bunch of seedlings in the process. And then November, replanted about a quarter of what we had planted originally. And then 2021, bare roots planted in March in the pasture grass. It's very easy to tell the difference between where canary grass is and where pasture grass is. I mean, you can just look at it, but it's very easy to tell the difference in soil moisture. Canary grass does not like drier soils. So there's a very distinct line between the two. And that was the line between willow and bare root trees and shrubs. Unfortunately, we had the heat dome in June, so those bare roots really suffered this summer. So here's this, excuse me. So here's a site in 2019. It's before the planting, before our site preps. This is kind of what we saw when we came out there in the springtime. And this is what it looked like after we did site prep. So, to me, a proper site prep for canary grass that's that thick is this. I mean, ecologically, it looks terrible. It looks like a golf course. But in terms of getting the canary grass under control, because it's a monoculture, you really need to get the site to this level so you can properly maintain it after that. I planted 750 red osier dogwood. Unfortunately, I planted them in an area of the channel that was anoxic, almost about well above 90% mortality, which I was really bummed about. But the willows did quite well, and we harvested a bunch of the hooker and Sitka to further plan out the site because I had under purchased. And this is a planting bar that we borrowed from the Skagit Fisheries. Very effective. So here we have that that photo we were looking at before with the WCC crew. Same site, November 2019. This is a particular site that had been sprayed. I originally had wanted it to be spraying in strips, but that turned out to be functionally impossible. And so they ended up spraying the whole site. And that turned out to be the easiest site to maintain because it did kill all the canary grass. There was still a healthy amount of seed source. So that resprouted, but then you were dealing with young canary grass plants that were easy to mow and maintain rather than resprouting from a very deep root network. Okay, so this little circle is a willow, and this is what we had to deal with in terms of, so one of the lessons learned is remember when you've site prepped and you've got a golf course, that the golf course is going to change. And so when I made the decision to cut those willows from 6 to 3 feet, I didn't really think this through very well. It was kind of a spur of the moment decision. What I did learn though is those 3-footers, if we did get the canary grass smashed down around it, they did quite well. But they needed to be not suppressed. Probably I suffered quite a bit of mortality too. But basically, if we had just let this site grow, the canary grass would have grown up, and then it falls over, and then that forms the first layer of mat. And then as years go by, more and more layers, and creates thicker and thicker of a mat. It becomes really, and that those canes fall over and smash these little plants down. So if you're not going to maintain this site, then you have to plant really tall stems. And the problem with that is you've got a tall 4 to 6 feet above the ground, but you only have 1.5 feet in the ground. And so that thing is either going to die or it's going to sit there for quite a while as it grows out its roots. Anyway, you can see is kind of what I talked about there. I really wish I had to put in more other shrubs, twin-bearing dogwood, which were available at WCD, but I didn't do that. I was so focused on trying to control the canary grass. My main lesson is hang in there, don't give up. I was kind of ready to give up summer of 2020, but we hung in there, and this is the site that was sprayed. It's doing quite well. This reached canopy closure last September. We're not going to maintain this anymore. And yeah. Budget. Probably spent more money than I needed to or wanted to on this site, but a lot of maintenance. And really, I think a lot of our maintenance budget is a result of the fact that we did not spray a glyphosate product here. There's a lot of bad press about glyphosate, and it's a tough one really to do socially anymore, but it's very effective. And really, glyphosate, it's the surfactant that's you have to worry about for the toxicity. Glyphosate by itself is not hugely toxic. And that's it.
So there are a few questions. One is somebody was wondering what the acreage and the planting density was.
Well, the entire fence side is 8 acres. You know, you have some willow clumps that were already there. And you have stream channels, which are pretty modest. And we were planning a 4x4 spacing, which I believe, gosh, I don't remember what the trees per acre that is, but I think it's 2,700 trees per acre. So it's really dense. So what's going to have to happen really is once you achieve canopy closure, and then it's going to be kind of a thinning operation to thin over time. And I would urge folks who come in after me, and it's going to be somebody else because I retire this year, is to thin and try to underplant other shrubs to increase the diversity.
What sort of success was there in the area scalped, and how deep did you scalp?
So scalping was just using some tools. It's basically you're just scraping back the grass mat. So it's just, the first couple inches just down to bare soil. So you still have the root network and everything. So it resprouts, but it kind of removes the thatch. So we really, I would say one of the things I forgot to mention is we've also ring sprayed there, and I forgot to put that in there. So with the scalping, really, we've done that with the willow areas quite a bit. And we've also ring sprayed those on top. Scalping seems to be a lot more effective in the grass. Seems to control that a little bit better than canary grass just shoots back quite quickly.
What kind of efficacy did you see with the glyphosate treatment versus the mechanical mowing treatment?
Well, with mechanical mowing, you're just making yourself feel better. So the efficacy with mechanical mowing is all above ground. You're just trying to keep the biomass down so you don't have the canary grass burying the stems until they're big enough. So really our strategy here. So this site here, so behind us was the site that hit canopy closure. This is looking forward. By the way, this stem right in front of us here was a 3-foot willow. So some of them just exploded. So yeah, so I think, you know, I would have, so there's a colleague at the land bank, Peter Giuze, which I really recommend you guys have come talk to you. And he worked down the Willamette and did, you know, large industrial scale riparian conversion from ag to riparian, and they use glyphosate products as their first step. And often what they do is they do it 2 years. So they spray glyphosate, they site prep, mow it. It would rebound, get up to 6 inches to a foot. They'd spray it, and then they'd wait for the seed to re-sprout, and then they spray it again, and then they would go in and plant. And they found that their maintenance costs were much, much less than kind of what we did here. This is really a nightmare in terms of maintenance, because you got to be on this multiple times during a growing season. It's expensive. But that is the trade-off you do. If you don't spray, you're going to be out there site prepping, or excuse me, maintaining quite a bit.
Are there farmers on San Juan Island who could farm the land under contract for willow production?
I'm sorry. Oh, contract. So we bought these from WACD. We have talked about, I mean, we could actually use this site as a source site for more willow. So that's a possibility. There are other willow areas. You know, it comes down to a cost benefit thing. How much does it cost for a crew, which costs, you know, a WCC crew is what, around $5,000 a week. You know, and a willow stake is 60 cents to $1. I mean, it's really a cost benefit thing. You know, I appreciate the fact the local seed source is really useful, but you really have to balance, you know, your budget.
Have you or others used plant-based thick matting for temporary weed suppression instead of opaque woven landscape fabric such as coir or jute or coconut fiber matting? If so, what product? Yeah, so for something this size, I just think it would be too expensive, and especially this site, you know, you remember that you know, it's entirely underwater for a month or 2 months. So it's not feasible at this particular site. You know, I do know that Esplenda does contract wetland mitigation, and they use landscape fabric, and they're very successful. But it's you know, we really have a plastic-free Sailor Seas. That's you know, a hashtag that we're trying to avoid using plastic in the San Juans. So luckily we don't have a whole lot of deer browse here. We have one buck, he rubs a little bit, but virtually no deer out here because it's out in the middle of an ag field, and deer really don't like the spot. There's not enough cover for him. So we luckily don't have to deal with deer browse. So yeah, I think, you know, in the future, maybe further sites upstream, we might be able to try some sort of suppression like that, but not at this site. There are many congratulations for your retirement in the chat. Congratulations.
Thank you. I saw some familiar names out there.
Byron, you mentioned early on thinking about this as a wetland restoration versus necessarily like a stream channel restoration. Could you just mention some of the different, I guess, goals or outcomes that you would envision in a successful wetland restoration?
Yeah, you know, it's been interesting. That's Adam, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a colleague, he's a fish biologist, he's retired, he's really competent. And he's like, you know, we need to get those guys out here to ditch it again. It's like, dude, we're not going to ditch this site, all right? Come on, it's a wetland, you know, so there's just this, and he's not alone in that thinking. So
So my goal here, and he says we're out here without a plan. It's like, no, we got a plan. It's just not the plan you want. So my goal here is like, let's put on a track where we can reintroduce beaver, you know, because he wants a rearing habitat, and what better way to have rearing habitat than to maintain these ponds longer than, you know, the month or two they're here during the winter. So historically, I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure that this lower valley was just full of beaver ponds. There is one mention in the GLO maps about winter ponded areas, and that San Juan Valley or Falls Bay Creek was perennial one time. It's not anymore. There's 60 artificial ponds in the watershed. But but I think so. That's my thinking for this site.